I remember the smell of burned pages, not from a fire in a home, but from the fire of hatred. They burned Malik's books when he spoke at the town hall, said he was too loud with his truth, but what they really feared wasn't his voice. It was the silence he broke.
My father used to walk that same path to the schoolhouse, clutching his books like shields. He told me, they might try to erase us, but they can't unteach what we learn. The ash from their fires still stains the sidewalk, but so do our footsteps. The sun had returned to the city like a stranger knocking on a locked door, unwelcome and too bright. Every window pane in the heights glared with the light of a world that had long forgotten its promise of justice. Micah sat on the edge of the stoop, his knees drawn to his chest, watching as Officer Lively's patrol car cruised slowly by for the third time that morning. The man never waved, never smiled, just stared, as if daring Micah to forget who held the weight of power. "What they want from us?" Khalil asked quietly, hunched beside him. We stay quiet. They still come around. We speak. They come harder. Micah didn't answer. He just stared at the sidewalk where an old rust-colored stain still marked where Tony had been slammed into the concrete the summer before. They called it reasonable force.
The meeting in the basement of St. Luke's was filled with more silence than speech. Old pews creaked beneath tired bodies. Jamila held her mother's hand tightly, both of them listening as Reverend Polk read the names, one by one. Jaden Marks, Tamir Bell, Cynthia Hayes, Jerome Buddy Watkins, and then Tony Henderson. The breath caught in Jamila's throat. She remembered the way he used to hum old soul tracks while sweeping up outside Jackson's groceries. She remembered his mother's screams. "Don't let them fade," Reverend Polk said, voice cracking. "Names matter. They carry the weight of all we ain't said."
The morning came gray, heavy with the kind of silence that follows shattered nights. I stood by the bus stop outside our old church, the one with the broken bell that hadn't rung in years. My hands were in my pockets, clenched tight around a letter I hadn't opened yet. A letter from my brother, sent from a place where time forgets names and walls don't forget screams.
I saw him from across the street. Jamal. Same stance, same tired weight in his shoulders that hadn't left since we were kids. I crossed slowly, careful with each step like I might shatter something fragile between us. "You gonna read it?" I asked him. My voice wasn't judgment, just wind carrying dust.
I nodded, but my fingers didn't move. It was easier to imagine what the letter might say than to hear my brother's truth. He says they watch the colored ones differently in there. Says it ain't just prison. It's a cage inside a cage. And most days it's like no one even knows they exist.
I felt it deep. Not just his words, but the way he said, they and we. That line again drawn between us and them. Jamal looked at me. "They moved him to solitary last week, said it was for his own safety. But you and I both know what that means."
I opened the letter. My brother's handwriting was shakier than I remembered. He wrote about nights when the lights never turned off, guards who stared too long, and a silence thicker than any scream. He wrote one line twice. "Don't forget me, even if they want you to."
We stood together in that foggy morning, the smoke of yesterday still clinging to our skin. There weren't enough words in either of our mouths to say what needed to be said. So we stood, and maybe that was enough for now.
The ground was still warm where the fire had once burned. The weeks had passed since the last spark died. I stood at the edge of the old lot, where the ashes of Mama's diner mixed with the dirt, like memories refusing to let go. They said it was an accident, faulty wiring, but we knew better. There had been whispers before the fire, threats scrawled in red across our walls, looks that lingered too long from across the street. Mama called it hate wrapped in silence. Now all that remained was char and soot, and the memory of her laughter between checkered tables. I knelt, brushing away the blackened dust, and found a shard of her favorite plate. Blue and white, chipped at the edge. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, when I faced what they tried to erase.
The rebuilding was slow, not just of walls, but of trust. People came, some with nails and lumber, others with quiet apologies wrapped in casseroles. Still, there were those who crossed the street to avoid meeting our eyes. I saw how Malik carried the weight, shoulders tense, words few. He wouldn't speak of the fire. He worked the land where the floor once stood like it owed him something, or maybe like he owed Mama everything. One evening, as the sun bled over the rooftops, I heard him singing low, voice cracked and raw, the same song Mama used to hum while flipping cornbread. His fists were full of ash and nails. The fight wasn't over, but the foundation had been laid, not just for a building, but for what would rise from the ash.
I didn't expect to find him there. Jamal, sitting alone in the field where the community center used to stand. The rubble had long been cleared, but the ground was still raw, like a wound that refused to close.
It's strange, coming back to a place that once held your laughter, your breath. Now all that's left is silence and the memory of how quickly fire erases history.
He didn't speak when I sat beside him, just handed me a folded paper, a flyer for the protest scheduled that weekend. On the back, scrawled in his messy handwriting, "We plant or we perish."
I wasn't trying to be a leader. I just wanted something to grow where they thought nothing ever would again. So I dug, I planted, even if it was just wildflowers.
And slowly, others followed. Children first, giggling, muddy hands, dropping seeds like tiny hopes. Then mothers, then fathers, until the lot bloomed not with buildings, but with resilience.
They took so much from us, but they can't take roots once they've sunk deep. And now in this soil, something else begins to live.
I look at Jamal now, his hands dirty, his eyes tired but alive. And I know this is not the end. This is what grows in the ruins. The sun rose over Hollow Creek, like it had every morning. But this time, its light felt heavier, almost reluctant to break through the thick gray that lingered in the sky. I sat on the porch of Mama's house, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, trying to warm a cold that wasn't in my bones, but in my spirit. All week long, folks had been whispering about the verdict. Not out loud, not in church, not even at the gas station. Just glances, just silence. And silence in Hollow Creek was never just quiet. It was heavy with history.
I walked the back streets near Mill Avenue, past boarded-up windows and closed-down diners, past the old hardware store where my uncle once worked, until the city forced it out. The protest signs were still taped to the lampposts, flapping in the wind like ghosts refusing to leave. I thought of Reynard. I thought of how he smiled even when folks looked right through him. I thought of how we carried him down that street, our arms aching, but our voices rising higher than the sirens that tried to drown us out.
Mama came out and sat next to me. She didn't say anything at first, just looked out to the street, her face like worn stone, carved by decades of waiting for a justice that never seemed to come. "They never saw him as a boy," she finally said, "only as a problem." I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that hadn't already been screamed into the wind.
That night, I stood in the town square again, not to shout, not even to be seen, just to stand, like a stone left behind after the flood. A girl placed a single flower where the paint had faded on the street, a child's chalk drawing, still there, even after the rain. Some things, even water couldn't wash away.
I buried the last flyer in the box, creased, weather-worn, stained by months of rain and rage. The rallies had ended, the cameras gone, even the whispers had grown quiet. But I still saw Reynard everywhere. Not his face. No, that had begun to fade. But the shadow he left behind. In the cracked sidewalk outside the school. In the way the old bus driver paused now when he turned the corner. In Mama's silence, when his name passed through the news like a falling leaf.
I left Hollow Creek at dawn, not because I was running, but because something in me needed to believe the road could lead to something more than grief. At the county line, I stopped the car, opened the window, let the wind in. "I'll remember," I said out loud. Not a vow, not a promise, just truth. And the ash in the air didn't sting as much anymore.